Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, today we have a massive stack of sources, really just a staggering amount of current global news. And it covers everything from the deep reaches of space to the political divides right here on Earth, and even a kind of secret biological thing happening right inside us.
It really is an incredible amount of information to sort through. Our mission today, I think, is to try and cut through all that noise, prioritize what really matters, maybe by theme, and connect some of these events that seem totally separate. You know, from new AI regulations maybe coming out of California to the certain shifts in language around the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Right, and we're going to start right at the top of our priority list. Pure science, pure discovery. And get ready for this one, it's a real aha moment. Turns out you, listening right now, you might literally glow when you get stressed.
Yeah, this is really foundational research. I mean, for ages, you've had folklore, even some pseudoscience, talking about human aura. But this new research, it moves it firmly into the realm of, well, measurable fact. We're talking about actual human bioluminescence.
Okay, I have to jump in here because that sounds wild. Not like a movie effect, but actual measurable light coming off us.
That's right. It's incredibly faint, of course, thousands of times dimmer than what our eyes can normally pick up. But they've captured it with these specialized, ultra-sensitive cameras. And it seems to tie directly to specific metabolic processes happening inside our cells, probably linked to, cellular respiration, maybe the creation of reactive oxygen species.
Okay, so unpack the stress connection for us. We feel stress, right?
Yeah.
Tension, adrenaline, heart races. Why would the body suddenly start, I don't know, emitting light?
It connects right back to that metabolic escalation, the fight or flight response. When you're stressed, your body needs energy, and it needs it now. So your metabolic rate just surges. Cellular energy turnover goes way up. And researchers found a really clear link. This ramped up energy use, especially the higher oxygen consumption and the byproducts created, it results in this noticeable uptick in light emission. Think of it like a tiny, tiny biochemical flare-up.
So the same system that helps me jump out of the way of a car is also making me faintly glow.
Essentially, yeah. A very, very faint glow.
Could we actually use this, like, diagnostically?
Well, that's the really profound implication, isn't it? Chronic stress, we know it's a massive contributor to really serious health problems, cardiovascular disease, weakened immunity, even neurodegeneration.
Right.
So imagine if you could monitor these subtle light patterns, maybe continuously, non-invasively, to gauge someone's chronic stress or inflammation levels before they turn into major physical symptoms.
That would be revolutionary, a literal biological marker of stress.
Exactly. It really challenges how we perceive health, suggesting our internal state has this external representation just, beyond what we can normally see.
Okay, from the hidden life inside us, let's pivot. Let's talk about the hidden life that maybe actually built the world under us. New studies are pushing back the timeline for life on land, suggesting fungi were dominant for maybe 1 billion years, long before plants took hold.
Yeah, that's a truly staggering shift in the timeline. We've always kind of put plants first, right? The original settlers on land, creating the conditions for everything else. But the evidence now suggests ancient fungi were here first. And they were just hanging around. They were playing this critical role as ecosystem engineers long before the first green shoots appeared.
How did they do that? Ecosystem engineers. I mean, we know they recycle nutrients, but how do they kickstart things for land-based life?
Well, they likely collaborated with ancient algae, but critically, they performed chemical weathering. They actually secreted these powerful organic acids.
Okay.
And these acids can break down hard bedrock, volcanic rock.
Yeah.
That process, that slow, steady breakdown of rock into loose minerals and organic matter, that's what helped form the very first primitive soils that later, more complex life needed to get a foothold.
So the fungi were like the original construction crew doing the heavy lifting to build the planet's infrastructure for life?
That's a great way to put it. It really reframes evolution, doesn't it? Suggests they were these dynamic forces actively changing the landscape, not just passively waiting for plants.
Laid the groundwork, literally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They built the foundation needed for life to make that huge leap from the oceans onto land. And speaking of foundations and things we can't see, we need to dive deep underground, 1,490 meters underground in South Dakota, actually, to the LUX Zeppelin experiment, LZ.
Right, LZ. That's the world's most sensitive dark matter detector, isn't it? Hunting for those WIMPs.
Yeah.
Weakly interacting massive particles.
That's the one. WIMPs have been the sort of leading theoretical candidate for dark matter for well, for decades. And dark matter, I mean, it's the invisible stuff that holds the universe together. Makes up about 27% of its total mass energy.
Compared to just 5% for ordinary matter, everything we see and touch.
Right, so 95% of the universe is still basically a mystery. And the LZ results,
Yeah.
well, they haven't given us that clear WIM signal everyone's hoping for.
So, what happens now when the world's best detector looking for the prime suspect comes up empty? What does that mean for physics?
It forces a major rethink. A paradigm shift, really. When your most sensitive tool doesn't find what you expect, scientists have to reconsider the fundamental models, the standard model of particle physics.
So looking for other candidates now?
Exactly. It's accelerating research into completely different ideas for what dark matter could be. For instance, people are looking much more seriously now at things like axions, these hypothetical, much lighter particles, or even primordial black holes, which would involve totally different physics than the WIMP model predicted. The search definitely continues, but the boundaries of what we thought we knew about the cosmos are definitely expanding.
That's a perfect transition from the unseen mass holding galaxies together to actual worlds we didn't even know could exist like this. Let's go from deep underground to deep space. We've got some incredible firsts from the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST, starting with, get this, the first ever weather report from a world without a sun.
Yeah, a rogue planet, a rogue world. A planet just drifting through space, not tied to any star. JWST gave us the first detailed look at its atmosphere. And it's fascinating. We're talking intense perpetual storms unlike anything in our solar system and really extensive auroras.
Wait, auroras? Storms? What's driving all that if there's no sun, no solar wind like we have here?
That's the big scientific puzzle, isn't it? Researchers think it must be driven by non-conventional processes, maybe leftover internal heat from when the planet formed. Or maybe it's interacting with stray magnetic fields out there in interstellar space. It really challenges our basic understanding of how atmospheres work and how energy moves around in deep space.
JWST didn't stop there. It also gave us a peek into what they're calling an exoplanet nursery.
Yes, the direct observation of a world called WISPIT 2b. It's essentially a baby giant planet, a protoplanet, about 5 times the mass of Jupiter.
Wow.
And it's sitting right in this ring-shaped gap in the disk of gas and dust around its star, WISPIT 2. It's incredibly young, maybe only 5 million years old.
So we literally caught a planet in the act of forming, clearing out its own path.
Pretty much, yeah. This observation is huge because it confirms a stage of planet formation called disk instability that we'd really only theorized about or seen in computer models before. Seeing it happen provides direct proof for those theories.
Amazing. And the search for life, or at least habitable conditions, continues. JWST also looked at TRAPPIST-1. That's about 40 light years away, right?
That's the one. And they detected the first hints of an atmosphere there. Now, it's just hints. We don't have the full data yet, but even a slight indication of an atmosphere on a potentially rocky, Earth-sized world in the habitable zone. Well, that's monumental. It's probably the strongest sign yet that the TRAPPIST-1 system might hold keys to finding life beyond Earth.
Okay, let's bring it a bit closer to home. Mars, NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and Blue Origin are teaming up for a mission launching this fall. Escapade.
Correct. Escapade is sending twin spacecraft to Mars, launching on Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket. And its goal is directly tied to why Mars looks the way it does today, cold and dry. They're going to study how the solar wind interacts with Mars and how its atmosphere escapes into space.
We know Mars probably had a thicker atmosphere, maybe even liquid water, billions of years ago. So Escapade is basically trying to catch the atmosphere stripping process in action.
That's exactly the mission. By measuring the rate and the ways this stripping happens, we get crucial data on atmospheric loss. And that doesn't just tell us about Mars, it helps us understand how any planet, including exoplanets, might hold on to or lose its potential for habitability.
And NASA's also pushing education, something called HEAT.
Yeah, the Heliophysics Education Activation Team, or HEAT. They're emphasizing that space weather isn't just some abstract scientific concept.
Right, it actually affects us. Power grids, satellites, GPS.
Precisely. So HEAT is focused on teaching students about the sun, its influence, space weather, using real NASA data, trying to build that next generation of researchers, part of their Living with a Star program. It connects what kids learn in the classroom directly to, protecting our infrastructure here on Earth.
And for those of us just looking up from Earth, October 2025 has some cool celestial events lined up.
They're definitely worth getting outside for. October 6th brings the supermoon. It'll look about 30% brighter and 14% larger than usual.
Nice.
Then we get 2 meteor showers. The Draconids peak around October 8th, maybe 10 meteors an hour, pretty modest.
Yeah.
But then the Orionids peak on October 21st, and that's exciting because those meteors are actually little bits of debris left behind by Halley's Comet.
Very cool. We should also briefly touch on how we're listening to the cosmos too, right? The gravitational wave detectors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like hearing the universe's invisible symphony. The network of observatories, LIGO in the U.S., Virgo in Italy, Kagra in Japan, they've detected over 300 black hole mergers just in the last decade.
300, wow.
It really cements how incredibly useful gravitational wave astronomy is. It gives us this fundamentally new way to perceive these incredibly violent, distant cosmic events that light-based telescopes just can't see.
So with all this activity exploring space, potentially finding new worlds, we need some rules, right? The Artemis Accords just got reinforced.
They did. The Accords were first established about 5 years ago, and they just got a big reinforcement at the 76th International Astronautical Congress in Sydney, Australia. We're now up to 56 nations signing on. They're committing to responsible exploration of the Moon, Mars, and beyond. It's basically an attempt to write the rules of the road before deep space becomes a wild west of commercial activity.
Makes sense. What are the key rules they're focusing on?
A few big ones. Non-interference is crucial, basically. Nations need to respect each other's activities, not mess with them. Orbital debris management is another huge one, especially for safety in low Earth orbit, which is getting crowded. And transparent sharing of scientific data. It's really about extending earthly diplomacy and cooperation protocols out into space.
And speaking of space activity, Elon Musk is still pushing hard for Mars.
Yeah, Musk recently reiterated his long-term vision, a self-sustaining civilization on Mars. He threw out some dates aiming for a Starship launch, maybe late 2026, human landings possibly by 2029. He also mentioned including the Optimus humanoid robot in those plans.
And didn't he say something about Mars being part of the U.S.?
He did. He referred to Mars as part of the United States, which, definitely raises some geopolitical eyebrows. It's kind of stakes a national claim on this interplanetary goal, mixing technology and vision with a potential future stance on sovereignty, even as the Artemis Accords are trying to set up these multilateral, non-territorial rules.
Interesting tension there. Okay, one last stop in space. Uranus's moon, Ariel, a possible hidden ocean.
That's the latest thinking. New research suggests Ariel might have once had a subsurface ocean, similar to Jupiter's moon Europa or Saturn's Enceladus.
But Ariel is way out there, so far from the sun. How would they know? How could it stay liquid?
They infer it from features on its surface specifically, these large canyons and ridge terrains. These look like signs of geological activity, maybe cryovolcanism, that could have been driven by heat from a subsurface ocean that maybe only froze over relatively recently in geologic time. It opens up possibilities for finding interesting chemistry, maybe even conditions suitable for life on these really cold, icy worlds far from the sun.
Okay, let's bring it back home, technologically speaking. Artificial intelligence, AI, it just keeps breaking barriers, doesn't it? And it seems to be fundamentally changing the timelines for some major scientific breakthroughs.
Absolutely. And maybe the most exciting recent example is in fusion energy. Fusion power, harnessing the energy source of the sun. It's always been this sort of holy grail for clean energy, but it's incredibly difficult to sustain, mainly because of issues keeping the superhot plasma stable inside the reactor, especially right at the plasma edge.
Why is that edge so tricky?
Well, that edge region is where the plasma confinement is weakest. If disruptions happen there, they can basically shut down the whole fusion reaction almost instantly. It's a major bottleneck. But scientists at Princeton University have developed this new AI tool called Diag2Diag, Diagnostics to Diagnostics.
Okay, Diag2Diag. What's it doing that, say, traditional sensors couldn't?
Well, the traditional hardware for measuring plasma conditions is often really bulky, very expensive, and sometimes the sensors themselves can actually interfere with the plasma they're trying to measure.
Ah, okay.
Diag2Diag uses advanced machine learning. It takes data from multiple existing sensors, even if they're imperfect, and it generates these synthetic but highly detailed predictions of what the plasma is doing in that crucial edge region. It essentially fills in the gaps that the physical sensors miss, and it can even predict instabilities before they actually happen.
Okay, now that sounds like a game changer. What does this mean for the timeline for actual fusion power plants?
This is where it gets really interesting. If you can use AI software to understand and stabilize the plasma better, instead of just building bigger and more complex physical sensors, you could potentially make future fusion reactors much more compact and, crucially, much more affordable.
Right.
That could dramatically accelerate the timeline for actually deploying clean, sustainable fusion energy.
Right.
Moving it from, a decades away future to something potentially much closer, much more practical.
And AI is speeding things up in energy storage, too, which is just as critical, right?
Definitely. There's a company called Periodic Labs using AI to discover new materials for electrodes in LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate batteries.
LFP, those are the ones without cobalt, used by Tesla and BYD.
Exactly. Cobalt-free is a big deal, reduces reliance on conflict minerals. And AI is drastically cutting down the time it takes to find and test promising new materials. What used to take years of lab work can now potentially be done in months through AI-driven simulation and prediction.
Now let's shift to the workforce impact. When people think AI future, they often picture, coders, data scientists. But the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, whose company is worth, $4 trillion now, he highlighted a very different set of jobs.
Yeah, he made a really interesting point. He emphasized the huge and often overlooked demand for blue-collar professions. Specifically, he called out electricians and plumbers as being critical in this tech-driven future.
Electricians and plumbers, how so?
His argument is that all this advanced tech, especially AI, relies entirely on physical infrastructure, massive data centers, complex cooling systems, reliable power delivery. You need skilled tradespeople to build and maintain all of that.
So the coders write the AI, but the electricians wire the potentially $500 billion server farms needed to run it.
Precisely. It's a powerful reminder to value traditional skills alongside digital ones. And that infrastructure scale is just immense. Look at OpenAI's Stargate initiative. They're partnering with Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, the big South Korean memory chip makers.
Stargate.
Right.
That's the one with the potential $500 billion price tag, right? Just for AI infrastructure?
$500 billion projected cost by 2029, yeah. That sheer scale just underscores the intense physical requirements, the specialized memory chips, the massive data centers needed to actually achieve AI dominance and train these increasingly huge language models.
Okay, moving into our homes now. The consumer AI ecosystem is also evolving fast. Google just launched a new smart home lineup using its Gemini AI.
Yeah, this looks like a significant step beyond the old sort of clunky Google Assistant commands. They're integrating Gemini into Nest cameras, doorbell speakers. The idea is more conversation control, more personalization. So instead of rigid commands, you can have more natural dialogues with your home system. And it uses better detection to maybe automate things based on your habits, trying to make the smart home actually feel, genuinely smart and anticipatory.
Meanwhile, OpenAI's Sora, the video generation AI, is moving into social apps.
Right, Sora seems to be shifting focus towards AI-driven video creation within social platforms. They're likely aiming to compete with players like ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, emphasizing collaborative creativity, letting users generate and share video content easily.
Okay, but as AI gets woven into everything, including information itself, we're seeing the start of what you might call an AI information war. Elon Musk's Grokipedia is a prime example.
Yeah, Musk's AI company, xAI, plans to use its Grok model to build an alternative to Wikipedia. Musk and others like White House crypto advisor David Sachs have labeled Wikipedia as politically biased. Musk claims Grokipedia will offer more impartial content.
The stakes here feel really high, don't they? This isn't just about finding facts anymore. It's potentially about who controls the narrative, who controls the knowledge base.
It absolutely highlights these growing concerns about information neutrality. Who gets to decide what's true? And what happens when knowledge is curated by an AI trained by a single corporation? The potential for bias, even unintentional bias baked into the training data, is enormous.
Is Wikipedia fighting back?
They are. The Wikipedia community actually launched an internal AI cleanup project back in 2023, specifically to combat low-quality or just plain wrong AI-generated content being inserted into articles. They're really emphasizing human oversight and vetting over the speed of AI generation, the fundamental clash of philosophies about knowledge creation.
And this blurring of lines between real and AI generated is hitting Hollywood too, right? With this AI actress, Tilly Norwood.
Tilly Norwood, yeah. Debuted at the Zurich Film Festival, apparently. A completely non-existent AI-generated starlet. And it's sparking a huge debate, obviously, about authenticity, creativity, the future of human actors, writers, directors. When virtual talent becomes indistinguishable from human performance, what does that mean for the entire industry? It's a really profound and, frankly, unsettling question.
Before we move off tech, let's quickly touch on data privacy and control. The UK government is pushing Apple again about encrypted backups.
Yes. The UK Home Office is renewing its efforts to gain access to encrypted iCloud backups. This keeps coming up, and it raises really significant red flags about user privacy and potential government overreach. If governments can force companies to bypass end-to-end encryption or unlock secure cloud data, then the whole promise of digital privacy starts to crumble, doesn't it? Especially for sensitive personal communications.
And stateside, a privacy bill got blocked.
Yeah, U.S. Senator Ted Cruz blocked a bill that aimed to extend personal data privacy protections nationwide to all Americans. His argument, the stated reason, was concern about government overreach and potentially stifling tech innovation and economic growth. It's that classic tension in U.S. politics. How do you balance strong consumer privacy rights with a desire for minimal regulation in the tech sector?
And a reminder that data breaches are still a constant threat.
Unfortunately, yes. The Canadian airline WestJet just confirmed a pretty big data breach, affecting about 1.2 million passengers. A hacking group called Scattered Spider apparently got unauthorized access to sensitive customer data. It just underscores that even major companies remain vulnerable targets for organized cybercrime, no matter the security measures they claim to have.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Let's go way back into deep history. Our understanding of when Homo sapiens, modern humans, first appeared seems to be changing again.
It does. There's new research suggesting that some ancient Homo sapiens skulls, which we previously thought were around 200,000 years old, might actually be closer to 300,000 years old.
Wow, another 100,000 years? How do they figure that out?
It's based on using more advanced dating techniques on the archaeological sites and the fossils themselves. And pushing back the timeline by that much, by 100,000 years, it really forces us to rethink the old story of human origins.
What does it mean for that traditional idea, the one where modern humans emerged from a single place in Africa?
It fundamentally challenges that single origin theory. A 300,000-year-old date suggests there might have been ongoing interactions, gene flow, exchanges of, tools, behaviors, maybe even diseases among different early hominin groups across various regions of Africa for a much longer period than we thought. It paints a much more complex picture, maybe a multi-regional evolution within Africa, rather than just one single birthplace.
Fascinating. Okay, let's jump forward to a very present, very urgent topic: climate change. We've got some tech news here, starting with Finland and a giant sand battery.
Yeah, this sounds really interesting. It's in Pornainen in Finland. They've brought online what they're calling the world's largest thermal storage solution using crushed soapstone in this case, but same principle. It can store 100 megawatt hours of thermal energy.
Okay, so how does a sand battery work? It stores heat.
Exactly. The idea is you take excess electricity generated from renewable sources, like wind and solar, especially when production is high but demand is low. You use that electricity to heat up the sand or crushed rock inside a big insulated silo. Sand holds heat really well for a long time.
And then you use that stored heat later.
Right. It releases the heat slowly, and in this case in Finland, they're using it to supply the town's district heating system during colder months when energy demand is high. It helps reduce reliance on fossil fuels for heating. It's a potentially very sustainable, low-cost way to store energy, using a really abundant material to tackle that intermittency problem with renewables.
That sounds like a really practical, clever solution, a clear win. But then we look at the global carbon market, which is supposed to be driving climate solutions, and it seems to be facing a major crisis of integrity.
Yeah, the Kariba REDD Plus project, the big forest conservation project in Zimbabwe, is under intense scrutiny. Verra, which is one of the main organizations that verifies carbon credits, is now seeking compensation and calling for millions of unused credits from this project to be canceled.
Why? What went wrong?
It seems there were major issues with the carbon accounting, basically. Questions about whether the project actually saved as much carbon as it claimed. And critically, reports suggest it failed to deliver the promised benefits to the local communities who were supposed to be involved and supported by the project. This project generated over $100 million worth of credits that companies bought to offset their emissions.
So it highlights that core problem with carbon offsetting, doesn't it? The risk of greenwashing, where companies buy credits that don't represent real emissions reductions or don't actually help the people on the ground.
Precisely. It really shakes confidence in the whole system. This crisis just underscores how vital it is to have really rigorous, transparent, and accountable standards for these offset projects. Otherwise, they risk becoming just a way for polluters to claim climate action without actually changing their behavior.
Adding a powerful moral voice to this whole debate, Pope Leo XIV has apparently weighed in very strongly on climate change recently.
Yes, the Vatican intervened quite decisively. The Pope issued strong statements condemning climate denial and calling for really urgent global action. By framing it as a matter of faith and stewardship of creation, his words carry significant influence, especially among Catholic communities worldwide, pushing for more immediate and decisive action to protect the planet.
Shifting to national policy in the UK, the Labour Party seems to be taking a very clear stance on fracking.
They are. Labour announced plans for new legislation that would permanently ban fracking in the UK if they form the next government. It's a very definitive position, setting them clearly apart from parties like Reform UK, which supports fracking. Labour is framing it as prioritizing long-term environmental protection and the shift towards renewable energy sources.
And finally, on the climate and security intersection, there's talk of an EU drone wall near the Russian border.
Yeah, this proposal is for a system, presumably involving technology like radar and jammers, aimed at countering unauthorized drones or unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, along the EU's eastern border with Russia.
How's that being received?
It's drawn criticism from a couple of angles. The Kremlin, predictably, called it confrontational. But maybe more significantly, Bloomberg News Analysis kind of dismissed it as potentially more of a PR stunt, questioning the actual feasibility and effectiveness. They pointed out the huge logistical challenges of trying to control all drone traffic in what's already very congested airspace, with lots of legitimate commercial and private drone use, not to mention other infrastructure.
Okay, let's dive into the geopolitical arena, which feels particularly tense right now, starting right here in the U.S. with the government shutdown.
Yes, the federal government entered a shutdown because Democrats in Congress refused to back the Republican funding plan. This created a legislative impasse, halting non-essential federal operations, and almost immediately, the blame game started.
Yeah, we saw that clip of Congresswoman Maxine Waters getting into it with a pro-EMS-gay reporter who was asking if Democrats were prioritizing health care for undocumented immigrants over citizens.
Right, and Waters very forcefully denied that framing. But the exchange itself just perfectly captures the incredibly polarized atmosphere right now, where almost any funding debate instantly gets framed through the lens of these domestic culture war issues.
And it's not just talk, right? There are real economic consequences.
Absolutely. The ADP jobs report, which tracks private sector employment, showed a loss of 32,000 jobs in September. That's a clear signal of labor market weakness, and analysts are linking it directly to the uncertainty and disruption caused by this political gridlock in Washington.
And specific agencies are hit hard, like the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. That raises safety questions, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Thousands of FAA employees are furloughed. Now, the essential personnel, like over 13,000 air traffic controllers, they're mandated to keep working, but importantly, without pay until the shutdown ends.
Right.
But other crucial functions, things like safety inspections, maintenance oversight, administrative support, those get stalled. And that inevitably raises concerns about potential risks creeping into the air traffic system over time.
Okay, let's shift focus overseas. The geopolitics around the Russia-Ukraine conflict seem to have taken a really interesting turn, specifically involving President Donald Trump's recent statements.
Yes, this was quite a shift. President Trump, who in the past had sometimes hinted that Ukraine might need to make territorial concessions to end the war, recently reversed course quite dramatically. He stated publicly that Ukraine can win, and even suggested they could potentially reclaim territories currently occupied by Russia.
That's a significant change in tone. Why now, do you think?
It's hard to say definitively, but it does align his public stance much more closely with the prevailing Western consensus, which supports a Ukrainian victory. It could be related to evolving political calculations or perhaps reflecting shifts in the perceived military situation on the ground. Whatever the reason, it's a notable rhetorical shift.
Meanwhile, Russia itself seems to be feeling the financial strain of the war, even if they project strength externally.
There are definite signs of pressure. The Russian government announced they're raising the value-added tax, the VAT, from 20% to 22% starting in 2026. Now, this directly contradicts an earlier promise from President Vladimir Putin not to raise taxes like that until at least 2030.
So the war spending is biting.
It certainly looks that way. It points to significant budgetary pressure. However, it's also true that Russia's oil exports, a key revenue source, have remained surprisingly strong despite Western sanctions and pressure on buyers like India and China, so they still have economic lifelines.
And the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant remains incredibly tense.
Extremely tense. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recently described the situation there as critical. The plant apparently endured a 7-day complete loss of external power, the longest such outage since the Russian occupation began back in 2022.
7 days without external power, that's terrifying.
It is. The plant relies on that external power for vital cooling systems to prevent a meltdown. Relying solely on backup diesel generators for that long is incredibly risky and raises major nuclear safety alarms internationally.
Shifting focus to the Middle East now, President Trump issued some kind of ultimatum regarding Gaza.
He did. He gave Hamas what he called a 3 or 4 days deadline to accept a Gaza peace plan that he's proposed, a plan which apparently has the backing of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The details released, about 20 points, were quite vague, leading to significant skepticism about its substance, enforceability, and what the long-term implications would actually be.
And there's controversy around who would administer Gaza after the conflict, under this plan or others being discussed.
Yes, serious concerns have been raised, particularly by Palestinian advocates. They worry that a proposed international administration, potentially involving the U.S. and Israel, could effectively erase Palestinian identity and political rights in Gaza, undermining sovereignty and self-determination.
And adding another layer of complexity, former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair is apparently involved now.
He is. Blair has been appointed to a Trump-led committee tasked with managing Gaza's future. His return to Middle East diplomacy has drawn considerable skepticism, given his controversial legacy from the Iraq War. Critics also point out the committee's stated focus seems to be heavily on foreign economic interests, raising doubts about whether the priority is genuine peace and Palestinian rights, or rather stabilizing the situation for international economic and security concerns.
While the diplomats talk, activists are trying to draw attention to the humanitarian crisis on the ground.
Absolutely. The global Samud Flotilla, which included activists like Greta Thunberg and some Malaysian celebrities, attempted to break the blockade on Gaza. They reported being dangerously intercepted by an Israeli naval vessel while still in international waters.
And the situation inside Gaza sounds desperate.
It really does. Reports describe families having to burn plastic trash and cardboard just to cook or stay warm because fuel is so scarce. This creates dangerously toxic smoke, leading to a surge in respiratory illnesses, all while hospitals are reportedly on the brink of collapse due to lack of fuel and basic medical supplies.
Okay, finally in this segment, let's look at U.S. foreign policy and trade tensions. First, lithium, the key battery component.
Right. The U.S. Department of Energy, the DOE, has taken a direct 5% equity stake in a company called Lithium Americas. This is to support their Thacker Pass project in Nevada, which is expected to be the largest lithium deposit in the U.S.
So this is about securing a domestic supply chain for EV batteries, reducing reliance on China and others.
Exactly. It's a major strategic move in the global race for critical minerals needed for the green energy transition. Trying to build that domestic capacity is seen as vital for economic and national security.
But in another critical tech sector, semiconductors, Taiwan seems to be pushing back against U.S. pressure.
It does. Reports indicate Taiwan has rejected a U.S. proposal that would have aimed for 50% of all global semiconductor manufacturing to happen within U.S. borders. Taiwan, which currently dominates high-end chip manufacturing, appears to be asserting its own strategic independence in this absolutely vital global supply chain, navigating pressure from both the U.S. and China to maintain its central role.
And there are reports comparing Trump's Latin America policy to the Monroe Doctrine.
Yes, some analysts are drawing that comparison. They argue that the Trump administration's hardline approach towards Latin America, emphasizing U.S. influence and countering Chinese and Russian presence in the region, echoes the historical Monroe Doctrine's assertion of U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. This approach has reportedly led to increased diplomatic tensions with several countries, for example, Colombia.
Okay, let's continue on the geopolitical front, focusing now on military matters and the rule of law. There's been a lot of talk recently from the U.S. Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth.
Yes, Secretary Hegseth has been quite vocal, emphasizing what he sees as an urgent need for the U.S. to significantly bolster its military capabilities. He's pointed particularly towards increasing threats, especially from China, and signaled a potential strategic shift in the Pentagon's focus more towards homeland security in the Western Hemisphere, arguing against what he calls a passive approach.
But his comments have really stirred controversy, haven't they? Particularly his remarks about military leadership.
Extremely controversial. He referred to top U.S. military officers as fat generals in a public address and argued they should resign if they don't align with his political agenda.
Wow.
Yeah. This immediately ignited a fierce debate about the politicization of the U.S. military. Many veterans groups voiced strong backlash, calling the remarks insulting and deeply damaging to the traditionally nonpartisan ethos of the armed forces and the principle of civilian control respecting military expertise.
And beyond that specific language, he outlined actual policy directives aimed at changing military culture.
He did. He laid out 10 specific directives targeting stricter standards for things like physical fitness, grooming, and overall discipline within the ranks. He explicitly framed these changes as necessary to restore traditional military values and push back against what he perceives as a liberal agenda, influencing military culture and readiness.
Okay, shifting from military policy to the rule of law, there was a significant court ruling concerning the rights of non-citizens during protests.
Yes, a federal judge delivered a strong ruling. The judge found that the Trump administration had unlawfully targeted non-citizens who were involved in pro-Palestinian protests, specifically marking them for deportation. The ruling stated this violated their First Amendment rights to free speech and assembly.
And the judge rejected the administration's argument connecting criticism of Israel to supporting terrorism.
Explicitly rejected it. The judge emphasized that criticizing the policies of a foreign government, even an ally like Israel, does not equate to material support for terrorism, and that non-citizens lawfully present in the U.S. generally retain fundamental constitutional protections like free speech.
This seems connected maybe to lingering concerns about surveillance programs from previous administrations, like Quiet Skies.
There's certainly a thematic link. The Trump administration recently dismissed 5 senior officials who were connected to that now-defunct Quiet Skies program. That was an aviation security program under the Biden administration that faced allegations it was improperly used to surveil or target domestic individuals, potentially including political opponents. The whole issue has now been referred to the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division for investigation, highlighting ongoing concerns about potential overreach or misuse of government security apparatus.
Looking globally now, we're seeing some major legal developments reflecting deep political instability elsewhere, starting in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
A really dramatic situation there. Former DR Congo President Joseph Kabila has been sentenced to death in absentia. He was convicted on charges including treason, as well as war crimes and crimes against humanity, linked to allegations that he supported the M23 rebel group after leaving office.
Kabila led the country for nearly 2 decades, right?
From 2001 to 2019, yes. He denies the charges, of course. But this sentence, handed down by a military court, underscores the intense political turmoil in the DRC and raises very serious questions about judicial independence and the use of the legal system in political conflicts there.
And similar concerns about politically motivated prosecutions are being raised in Moldova.
Yes, in Moldova, Marina Tauber, a former lawmaker from the now-banned opposition SOR party, was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, also in absentia. The conviction was for illicit party financing. Tauber and her supporters claim the prosecution is politically motivated, an attempt by the current pro-European government under President Maya Sandu and her PAS party to sideline political opponents. It reflects ongoing tensions in Moldova as it navigates its path towards European integration amidst significant internal political divisions.
All right, let's pivot to the economy, markets, and maybe most importantly, how it all affects our wallets. Globally, the picture looks, well, indebted. Record high global debt.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty staggering. Global debt has climbed to a new record of $310 trillion. That's a trillion with a T.
Wow. What's driving that?
It's a combination of factors. Part of it is attributed to the steady decline in the value of the U.S. dollar recently, which makes dollar-denominated debt appear larger in other currency terms. But it's also driven by things like global interest rate cuts implemented by central banks trying to stimulate economies that have been facing sluggish growth. But that sheer mountain of debt definitely raises long-term concerns about global financial stability.
And speaking of stability, the Kremlin issued a pretty stark warning about the potential use of frozen Russian assets, didn't they?
They did. This relates to an EU proposal to use the profits generated from frozen Russian central bank assets, estimated around $140 billion, to fund a reparations loan for Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov didn't mince words. He called the proposal outright theft and warned it would lead to severe legal challenges and, more broadly, fundamentally erode trust in the entire global financial system. Russia argues that using sovereign assets this way sets a dangerous precedent and undermines the principles of international finance.
Interesting. And we're seeing shifts in how the super wealthy are investing, too, moving away from traditional assets.
That's right. There are reports indicating that amid all this economic and geopolitical uncertainty, very wealthy Americans are becoming more defensive. They're apparently moving away from things like publicly traded stocks and even traditional real estate.
So where are they putting their money instead? Gold.
Not just gold, though that's likely part of it. The reports suggest a pivot towards more sophisticated defensive assets, things like infrastructure bonds, specialized private credit funds. Basically, areas perceived as less volatile and better insulated from market shocks or potential crises. It signals a deep-seated concern about the stability of conventional markets and monetary policy among those with the most to lose.
Okay, let's look at the U.S. economy specifically. We had some surprisingly strong GDP numbers for the second quarter of 2023.
We did. The economy grew at a 3.8% annualized rate in Q2, which was stronger than initially expected. It showed a degree of resilience, holding up relatively well against inflation and the Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes. The growth was driven largely by continued consumer spending and solid business investment.
But that resilience is being tested by inflation, which ticked up again.
Unfortunately, yes. U.S. inflation rose again in August, hitting 3.7% year over year. And the increases were noticeable in essential goods, groceries, gasoline. This persistence of inflation makes the Federal Reserve's job really difficult, trying to balance the need to control rising prices without tipping the economy into a recession.
And are there warning signs coming from the auto industry?
There seem to be. Reports point to declining vehicle sales, automakers feeling the pinch from rising tariffs on imported parts or materials, and maybe a slower than hoped for transition to electric vehicles. Adding to the concern, a major lender specializing in subprime auto loans recently collapsed. That highlights potential vulnerabilities in auto financing, and some analysts worry it could be a canary in the coal mine, signaling broader economic instability if affordable transportation becomes harder to access.
In the corporate world, we're seeing more consolidation, especially in streaming. Fubo and Hulu.
Yes, Fubo shareholders approved a merger deal with Disney's Hulu Plus live TV service. Under the deal, Disney will end up owning about 70% of the combined entity.
Why the merger?
It's all about scale and competition in the incredibly crowded streaming market. By combining Fubo's sports-focused content with Hulu's broader library and live TV offerings, the goal is to create a much stronger competitor against rivals like YouTube TV. It's another sign of the streaming wars pushing towards consolidation.
And for consumers, especially in the UK, even simple things like a breakfast deal are getting more expensive, Greg's.
That's right. The popular UK bakery chain Greg's raised the price of its breakfast meal deal. They cited the usual culprits: ongoing inflation pushing up ingredient costs and persistent supply chain issues making operations more expensive. It's a small example, but reflects the broader cost of living pressures many people are facing.
But elsewhere, big players are trying to compete on price. Amazon launching a budget grocery brand.
Yeah, Amazon is jumping into the affordability wars with a new private label grocery brand called Amazon Saver. Most of the products under this brand are reportedly priced under $5. This is a direct challenge to established budget retailers like Walmart and Target here in the U.S., and it comes at a time when food prices have risen significantly globally. Reports mention European food prices are up by about a third over the last 6 years. So affordability is a key battleground.
Okay, 2 more quick hits. President Trump announced a new initiative aimed at lowering drug prices, Trump RX.
Yes. President Trump announced the launch of a website called Trump RX and mentioned a deal supposedly struck with Pfizer. The stated goal is to lower prescription drug prices, with a particular focus mentioned on Medicaid beneficiaries. As part of this, Pfizer apparently received a 3-year reprieve from certain tariffs. It seems to be part of a broader push on healthcare costs.
And finally, a major legal battle is brewing over the independence of the Federal Reserve, involving Governor Lisa Cook.
That's right. The Supreme Court has stepped in, temporarily blocking President Trump's attempt to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, who was appointed during the previous Biden administration. The court has agreed to hear full oral arguments on the case in January.
And this revolves around the president's authority to fire a Fed governor.
Exactly. It centers on whether the president can fire a Fed governor at will, or only for cause, meaning for specific misconduct or failure to perform duties. The Federal Reserve Act includes that for cause protection, designed to shield the central bank from short-term political interference when it's setting monetary policy, like interest rates.
Why is that independence considered so important?
It's seen as crucial for maintaining stable monetary policy focused on long-term economic health, rather than having interest rates manipulated for short-term political gain, say, before an election. If a president could fire governors who disagreed with them, it could severely compromise the Fed's ability to make unpopular but necessary decisions to control inflation or manage the economy impartially. This case could have major implications for the future power dynamic between the White House and the Fed.
Okay, we're nearing the end. Let's wrap up with some important updates on public safety, health, global crises, and maybe a slightly lighter note at the end. Starting with natural disasters, a serious earthquake hit the Philippines.
Yes, sadly, a powerful 6.9 magnitude earthquake struck the central Philippines recently. Reports indicate dozens of people were killed, and hospitals in the affected areas, particularly Cebu province, which declared a state of calamity, were quickly overwhelmed. It's another devastating reminder of the geological risks in that region.
An infrastructure failure caused a tragedy in Indonesia.
Also very tragic news from Indonesia. A multi-story building at the Al-Khazini Islamic boarding school in Sidoarjo, East Java, collapsed. Initial reports said at least 91 people, mostly students, were trapped inside. Rescue footage showed desperate efforts to pull survivors from the rubble. It immediately raises serious questions about building safety standards and inspections for public facilities like schools.
Meanwhile, in Chile, there's a development on the environmental justice front involving that huge sinkhole.
Yes, after looming over the town of Tierra Amarilla for 3 years, a Chilean environmental court has finally issued a ruling. It mandates the Canadian-owned mining company, Minera Ojos del Salado, to take concrete steps to address the environmental damage caused by their operations and, significantly, to refill the giant sinkhole that appeared near the town. It's a notable step towards holding a multinational corporation accountable for the environmental consequences of its mining activities.
And closer to home, a building collapse in New York City.
Yes, in the Bronx borough of New York City, a 20-story public housing building partially collapsed. There was apparently a loud explosion heard beforehand, possibly gas-related, though authorities thankfully reported no initial injuries. Still, a partial collapse like that is incredibly alarming and raises concerns about the structural integrity of aging public housing stock.
Turning to global health, we touched on the situation in Gaza earlier, but the health impacts go beyond immediate injuries, right?
Absolutely. The humanitarian crisis there is creating secondary health crises. As mentioned, families burning plastic and trash for fuel leads to toxic smoke inhalation and a surge in respiratory illnesses. And with hospitals struggling due to lack of fuel and supplies, treating even basic conditions becomes incredibly difficult, compounding the suffering.
And on a microscopic level, there are growing concerns about microplastics and human fertility.
Yes, this is really worrying research emerging. Studies are consistently finding microplastics, tiny plastic particles, deep within human reproductive tissues. They've been detected in a high percentage of ovarian follicular fluid samples, around 69%, and also in seminal fluid, around 55%.
Wow. What does that mean?
We don't fully know the long-term consequences yet, but the fact that these synthetic particles are penetrating so deeply into our reproductive systems raises very serious concerns about potential fertility disruption, hormonal imbalances, and other health effects that scientists are now racing to understand.
In the UK, they're trying a new public health tactic to fight obesity, banning BOGO deals.
Yeah, England has implemented a ban on buy one, get one free promotions and similar multi-buy deals, specifically for foods deemed unhealthy, things like crisps, potato chips, sweets, candy, sugary fizzy drinks. The idea is to tackle the obesity crisis by removing these incentives that encourage people to buy larger quantities of less healthy, non-essential food items.
And another UK health policy change, mandatory online booking for GPs.
Yes, every general practitioner or GP practice in England is now required to offer patients the ability to book appointments online. It's part of a push towards modernizing healthcare access. However, it has drawn some concern from doctors' unions who worry it might disadvantage patients who aren't tech-savvy or don't have easy internet access, potentially creating access inequalities.
Okay, shifting to security and rule of law issues. Arrests in Germany linked to Hamas.
Yes, German authorities arrested 3 men who were suspected of planning attacks against Jewish and Israeli institutions within Germany. Federal prosecutors stated they believe the suspects have links to Hamas's military wing. It highlights the ongoing international concern about extremist threats and the potential for conflicts elsewhere to spill over into Europe.
And we need to acknowledge the grim reality of sexual violence globally, highlighted by a couple of recent, very different but equally disturbing cases.
Absolutely. It's crucial to keep this in the spotlight. In the UK, there was the recent jailing of the ringleader of the Rochdale grooming gang, responsible for the horrific abuse and rape of vulnerable young girls over many years. And concurrently, reports continue to shed light on what's described as a hidden crisis of sexual violence against boys in India, a problem often made worse by cultural taboos, victim blaming, and inadequate legal protections specifically addressing male victims. Both highlight the pervasive and complex nature of sexual violence across different contexts.
And a sad note from the diplomatic world, South Africa's ambassador to France.
Yes, tragically, South Africa's ambassador to France, Natim Faithwa, was found deceased in the courtyard of a Paris hotel. Preliminary findings reportedly suggest the possibility of suicide, though investigations are ongoing. A very sad loss for South African diplomacy.
Okay, let's end on a slightly lighter note, maybe a nod to pop culture and sports. It's the 20th anniversary of Serenity, the Firefly movie.
It is. 20 years since Serenity hit theaters. It's amazing how that film, basically willed into existence by the sheer dedication of the Firefly fan base after the TV show's cancellation, has endured as such a beloved cult classic. That unique blend of space opera and Western grit. It really captured something special.
And some highlights from the sports world, cricket and football.
Yeah, the Women's Cricket World Cup saw Australia take the trophy, with standout performances like Ash Gardner hitting a century. And in football, there were some inspiring stories mentioned about the resilient careers of players like Christian Burgess and Ross Sykes, showing that perseverance pays off.
And a great analogy from the U.S. women's soccer coach, Emma Hayes.
I like this one. She compared being an international team manager to being a grandparent. You have these intense, precious, but limited periods of time with the players, trying to make the most impact you can, unlike the daily grind of club management. A nice perspective on the unique challenges of coaching a national team.
Okay, wow. We've covered a huge amount of ground today.
Yeah.
From literally the faint light of stress, maybe glowing off our skin, to the unseen dark matter holding the entire universe together. And then right down to the really fragile foundations of our global financial systems, our political systems.
It really have. We saw how AI is just weaving itself into everything, isn't it? From potentially accelerating fusion power to changing how we interact with our homes, and how these deeply personal things like health concerns about microplastics or the right to protest get completely tangled up in these huge geopolitical machines.
So what's the thread connecting all this, do you think?
You know, listening back, a recurring theme feels like this constant tension between control and autonomy.
Right.
Whether it's political leaders trying to control the flow of information with things like Wikipedia, or the desperate need to control the stability of a nuclear plant in a war zone like Zaporizhia, or even the Supreme Court stepping in to protect the autonomy of the Federal Reserve from political interference. Maybe even our own bodies betraying our stress levels with that biological glow, a loss of internal control made visible.
That's a great point. Control versus autonomy.
And I think the key takeaway maybe is just how crucial critical thinking is, and demanding transparency, especially when systems, whether they're biological, political, technological, financial, become incredibly complex or concentrated or just plain overwhelmed. We have to keep questioning.
Definitely. So plenty for you, our listeners, to think about. What are you going to dive into first? That unexpected boom predicted for blue-collar tech jobs? Or maybe the possibility of a hidden ocean, way out on Uranus's moon Ariel? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.
You're enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.